We leave you now with words from El-Hajj Malik El-Shabazz.
Before I get involved in anything nowadays, I have to straighten out my own position. And which is clear, I am not a racist in any form whatsoever. I don't believe in any form of racism. I don't believe in any form of discrimination or segregation. I believe in Islam. I'm a Muslim. And there's nothing wrong with being a Muslim. Nothing wrong with the religion of Islam. That just teaches us to believe in Allah as the God. And those of you who are Christians probably believe in the same God. Because I think you believe in the God who created the universe. And that's the one we believe in, the one who created the universe. The only difference being, you call him God, and we call him Allah. Jews call him Jehovah. If you could understand Hebrew, you'd probably call him Jehovah too. If you could understand Arabic, you'd probably call him Allah. But since the white man, your friend, took your language away from you during slavery, the only language you know is his language, your friend's language. So you call for the same God he calls for. When he's putting a rope around your neck, you call for God, he calls for God. But the real religion of Islam doesn't teach anyone to judge another human being by the color of his skin. The yardstick that is used by the Muslim to measure another man is not the man's color, but the man's deeds, the man's conscious behavior, the man's intention. And when you use that as a standard of measurement or judgment, you never go wrong.
No more a man, but a seed which will come forth again. We'll know him as a prince. Our own black shining prince who died because he loved us so.
Welcome to this panel, Change Yourself to Change the World, Dignity, Affirmation, and Social Transformation. The song we just heard by Kamasi, Washington, is titled Malcolm's Theme. We offer that song to open up this conversation for two connected reasons. First, recognizing today as Malcolm X's birthday. And of course, it's Malcolm X's voice we heard at the end of the song. And secondly, to animate one of the central components and concerns of this conversation, transformation, and the idea of changing yourself to change the world. In other words, we would like to suggest that Malcolm X is a historical example of the type of transformation that we can look towards as we envision and create the transformation we need to make amongst ourselves and the broader society. And Malcolm is often recognized as someone who transformed in a couple of ways, but we want to go beyond those. So he's often recognized as someone who transformed from a criminal to an activist to a leader and so forth, which is accurate, but is only part of the story and in some ways reduces who and what he was. Secondly, sometimes see him as transforming from his hatred of white people in the Nation of Islam towards something afterwards. Now, of course, in fact, he never hated white people, but that is one way in which people mistakenly understand his transformation. We would like to suggest that Malcolm's transformation included his transformation through and beyond the Nation of Islam. But what's most important about that and most illuminating for us is the way he understood his own inner transformation as part of and connected to broader social transformation, which of course he was a part of, and we heard him speaking of in those few words of his that close out the song. So we have Malcolm to start us off for this conversation, which between Myrtle Thompson Curtis, who was one of the co-founders of an organization called Freedom Growers, and Matt Burkhold, who is the creator of the Visionary Organizing Lab. My name is Stephen Ward, and I'll be moderating this conversation between Myrtle and Matt, and then with all of you the questions that you submit. So we can explore this idea and pathways for changing ourselves to change the world. So let's begin by asking each of you, Myrtle and Matt, to spend a few minutes just introducing yourselves, telling us a little bit about yourself and giving us a picture, a snapshot in this moment of your organization, which we then can explore further beyond that. And so I'll invite the two of you to decide who would like to proceed first, Myrtle or Matt.
Myrtle, you want to go first? You want me to?
It doesn't matter, dear. It doesn't matter. I'm prepared to say a few words.
Well, I'm going to pick you then, Myrtle.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and thank you for having me. Stephen, so far, so good. My name is Myrtle Thompson Curtis, and I am a lifelong Detroiter. But before I get started, I just want to give respect to the ancestors and the struggle that continues. So, lifelong Detroiter. I am a wife, a mother, a partner, grandmother, organizer on the East Side, co-founder of an organization, Freedom Growers. I am a council member of the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center. I sit on the board of the Jefferson Chalmers Farmers Market here in Detroit. And I'll talk a little bit now about the work of Freedom Growers, which is my passion. Freedom Growers is a urban ag organization on the East Side. It's a small space. It's about 4 city lots joined together where we grow all sorts of vegetables, fruit trees, and berry bushes, some herbs and some flowers. It's a space that we've been holding down since 2009. We have mentors in this gardening, urban ag farming movement across this great city of Detroit and abroad throughout. We've made many connections and networking through farming and gardening. Freedom Growers was not just my idea. It was a collaborative work of myself and my partner, Wayne Curtis. And it encompasses many, many relationships that we've built through mostly his lifetime of activism and social justice work, being an artist and activist. We have programming for young people. We have programming that is geared towards art, called Art in the Garden. We emphasize cooking healthy by using the produce that we grow. We are part of a CSA this year, which is Community Supported Agriculture. And that this year is being spearheaded by our daughter, Curtis. And the name of her work is Black Food Love, which I just love that. We're a small organization. Oh, and we also have a community culture hub, and we call it the 291 Culture House, which is a residential space, a meeting space, a music space, an art space, a library history space. I mean, it's where we meet and continue to carry on the work of what's happening in a garden. It's our indoor space. So with that being said, I'll say the goal and the mission of Freedom Growers is to change hearts and minds through food, art, and education.
Thanks, Myrtle. Hey, y'all, my name is Matt Burkhold. Thank you, Steve, Myrtle, for being here. Thank you, May and PJ for organizing this and providing a space for the three of us to collectively get together and run our mouths. I said, my name is Matt Burkhold. As Steve said, I'm the creator of an organization called Visionary Organizing Lab. We are based in Washington, D.C., which where I live, which I do not call home, but I do live here. I was born in Michigan. New York is my home. And Visionary Organizing Lab. We like to describe our work as organizing around the human spirit's desire to grow. Technically, what that looks like is workshops that we call praxis labs. We offer classes. We work with groups that want to explore creating new systems and transforming themselves in the world. Our work operates basically under two assumptions. One, that human beings have a desire to grow, that we want to become more fully human. We want to, I'm looking at the book next to me, Paulo Freire's Pedagogy of the Pressed, who would talk about, the job of human beings. Humans are searchers, and our ontological vocation is to grow or is to become. And so our work deeply draws from that. And our second assumption is that racism, capitalism, sexism, and the exploitation of nature constitute a system that greatly distorts our ability to grow, and therefore distorts the ways in which we use our creativity. And so our work attempts to reconnect people to our creative capacity to do things, to love, to grow. And we believe that doing so requires supporting people to create new economies, institutions, and cultural practices. And that through the creation of those, we connect to that creative capacity, become more fully human, and we can create a system that nurtures and supports the human desire and capacity to grow, rather than living under this system, which necessarily distorts it.
Our focus is understanding, exploring, working with, and making useful this concept of changing yourself to change the world. To get there, I'd like to ask each of you now to talk a little bit about your journey to this organization, the space that you just told us about, through which you are actualizing that. So in whatever ways you interpret that, what from your journey, can you share with us about what brought you to Freedom Growers, brought you to Visionary Organizing Lab? Which means could be part of your own personal particular journey, part of the broader context that which you created this space, but something about what brought you to that, and then we'll talk more about the work that you do and what you're learning from that work. So we'll start with you, Myrtle. What brought you to things you can tell us about your journey that brought you to Freedom Growers?
Thank you, Stephen. That's well, I'll go back about 10, 12 years. I've always been a person who was re-examining what was going on with me internally and externally. And so I was working in an industrial kitchen. I had recently the facility I was at came under new management, and it was beginning to be a hostile situation somewhat. And I had really started to experience allergies with food, and at the same time I had really started my relationship with my now partner, Wayne Curtis. We had always been friends for a long time. Matter of fact, that book you were talking about, The Pedagogy of the Oppressed, was one of the books he gifted me some years ago, along with Bell Hooks, Ain't I a Woman, on racism and sexism. Yeah, he gave me a couple of books. And well, anyway, that was in the 90s when he gave me those books. But the 2000s, I was working in a kitchen and the food service industry. I was preparer of foods. And like I said, I started having these allergies, and he deals with high blood pressure. And so our dating got serious. Ooh. And he came over to visit, and I had these vacant lots next door to my house. He was staying downtown in an apartment. And along with bringing books all the time, he brought this idea of a garden. We should have a garden in order to utilize this vacant space. But prior to that, we had began to make meetings together all over the city. He had friends, Ron Scott and the folks from the Coalition Against Police Brutality, all these folks who were organizing and doing this great work. The folks from Detroit Black Food Security Network. He was a teacher at Inseroma at one time, one of the African-centered schools in the city. And so he had all these wonderful relationships. And then one day he ran into Rich Feldman, and they invited us over to the Bog Center. And so it was just a steady progression of me being introduced into this new world that was bringing some of what I was reading from these books to life. And with that, it was just basically a natural progression that this garden would happen. This organization came out of the garden. It was the work that we were doing, the prompting from our network. And so it was just a natural progression because of the work we were doing. It was just, we loved it, folks loved it. And so we had to organize around that work. So that's basically how it came to be. It was a progressive step of learning, understanding, and needing to change because he wanted to eat better. I wanted to eat better, utilize the land. So there you have it. And then when we jumped in, urban ag was really taken off in the city of Detroit. There weren't even ordinances or any real structures around it. Folks were just popping up gardens all the time. But when we got into it, we really got into it with a commitment to not just ourselves, but to the folks who had to deal with this garden right on this city block. So there came commitment, there came more of our understanding. The more we learned, the more we didn't know.
Thank you, Myrtle. And again, we'll be able to pick up on some of those things as the conversation goes along. Matt, same to you.
I can do that. Steve, feel free to, just interrupt me if I get too long-winded. Because both of y'all know that's a tendency I exhibit sometimes. Visionary Organizing Lab is kind of the culmination of years of life experience. I think that this notion of change yourself to change the world, at earlier stages in my life, I was in vast need of transformation, in desperate need of transformation. Let me back up. I've been a white man my whole life, and I happen to have been born on a block where I had Black neighbors. And so I was afforded the grace and opportunity to, from a very young age, get to know Black people as human beings rather than as some sort of racial caricature. I understood the unbearable smell of chitlins before they cooked, as early as 7 years old. And I went to schools with a lot of Black people, and I grew up, I had Black teachers. I think most of my schools, except for my very first school, may have all had Black principals. And so I had what I later grew to understood to be a very rare experience of being a white person who engaged with Black people who had very real power over me. And I say that because that was key to understanding how the rest of my life played out and how Visionary Organizing Lab played out. By the time I was out 14, probably 15, I was a small time criminal. I couldn't finish high school. And I began to learn about white supremacy You know, I was a crew, might be, you know, me and 3 or 4 black men, and we would go into a store, and they sold liquor in grocery stores in Michigan, which I later learned they don't do everywhere. But if 4 of us went into a grocery store together, we knew the security would follow them. And I came up in the 90s with big baggy pants and baggy clothes. And, you know, so I could fit a whole bunch of liquor in my pants and coat, you know, and I learned, you know, that being white gave me you know, a license to act a fool, you know, and commit crimes and all kinds of stuff in ways that my black peers could not. And so through a series of, you know, it was very clear that I was, you know, headed to jail or death. And I avoided that through a series of transformative experiences. And while the guys I grew up with went to prison, I went to college, and gained a knowledge, a language to understand institutional systemic racism, and understood why the outcome of my life was very different than the guys I grew up with. And morally, I said, you know, I feel a obligation to create or contribute to creating a world where the sons and daughters of the guys I grew up with were given the second chances that I got and they deserved, but were denied because my whiteness afforded recognition of my humanity in a way that their blackness did not, and a worthiness of second chances. And so I became an activist, became an organizer, and I was absolutely horrible. I couldn't organize a sock drawer. And I came to understand over the years that I was a horrible organizer because I was walking around real woundedly. You know, I was walking around real wounded. You know, I lost, I think, 3 friends to gun violence the year I was 17. I lost another, you know, several to the penitentiary that same year. And I was unable to form any kind of loving, healthy relationship that wasn't selfish and manipulative with other human beings. And so, you know, I couldn't organize. I can talk well, so I can mobilize people, but I couldn't sustain a thing. And so I couldn't organize anything because people didn't trust me. And alongside of that, you know, I couldn't maintain any decent friendships or romantic relationships because I was, you know, manipulative, deceitful, and just rooted in fear. My whole life was just, you know, rooted in fear. And as I got tired of destroying relationships, I began to seek paths of healing. And an old head of mine took me through a process of healing from grieving, you know, the wounds of my childhood. And it helped me connect to my heart and my spirit for the first time. And as I connected to that heart and spirit, my understanding of activism, my understanding of politics, and my understanding of what social change looked like also changed. And I began to understand, you know, that I began to believe and understand that all of us, you know, have to change and grow and transform ourselves in order to create a world that's worth living in. And so after experimenting with a whole bunch of forms to carry some of that work out, I want to say that Myrtle's work at Feed 'em Freedom was critical to the evolution of Visionary Organizing Lab. I used to spend a lot of time in Detroit and around the Barg Center. And I was living in New York and saw people like Myrtle using vacant lands, people like Ron Scott using vacant lots to create these processes, whether it was growing food, whether it was forms of community-based conflict resolution that were both providing for people's needs and transforming people from the inside out, you know, engaged in creative activity that somehow was healing folks from the wounds of capitalism, racism, and sexism. And I began to think to myself, this is great that they're doing this here. What's it look like in New York? What's it look like in Philadelphia? I ain't moving to Detroit. What's it look like to do this in a place where land isn't available and has a very different history from Detroit's history? And so me and a wonderful young woman named Amaka Okechukwu, who is my partner, a brother by the name of Sean Whitehorn, and another brother by the name of Sean Lynn, and a handful of other people began to explore what those activities and questions might look like for New York. We did this in a collective called Growing Roots, which amicably went our different ways when we couldn't agree on a number of things. I began to experiment with Amaka and Sean, a kind of series of workshops. We said, we can't grow food in New York the way they grow it in Detroit. But what kind of conversations might we engage people in that will support them in raising the kind of questions that Myrtle and them was asking, which led them to begin growing food and so on and so forth. And so we began to develop a series of workshops that we hope might, facilitate or stimulate that kind of imagination and question raising. And that over time evolved into Visionary Organizing Lab. And our work today is we emphasize that all of our work involves both a intellectual and historical inquiry combined with a kind of personal and mental health or emotional inquiry.
Thank you, Matt. Each of you has mentioned the Boggs Center, so I'll just say for everyone that they're referring to the James and Grace Lee Boggs Center to Nurture Community Leadership, an organization, again, which Myrtle and I are affiliated with in Detroit, which Matt has been connected to. So we can say more about that and about those people, James and Grace Lee Boggs, as well as others who are involved in it. Ron Scott, the late Ron Scott was mentioned. We can talk about any of those when we get into the conversation. So each of you has told us, thank you, a little bit about yourself and about your journey to the organizations that you created and continually to create. Now let's please talk about your journey through them. In other words, what you have learned over the course of the work you're doing in Freedom Grower and Beyond, Growers and Beyond, and in the Visionary Organizing Lab and beyond. What you've learned, how you've grown, how you've seen others grown through the work that you've been doing, and highlight any particular parts of that or any examples that you care to offer.
That's a lot, Stephen.
And if you want me to prompt, then I can do that. If you want me to get specific, I can do that. But I want to offer it that way and see if you want to take it that way, or I can get more specific.
You know what? I'll just say the overall process of not just growing food, but like Grace would always say, growing your soul. That work that requires a lot of patience, and I think what I'm learning more so now is that people don't think they have a lot of time, so they become very impatient. And I'm gonna reflect on myself with that statement. It's learning how to restructure or look at time just differently in doing this work of organizing anything from the garden beds on down to our programming, leaving room for time to ponder and to figure out. And I don't even want to call it plan A, plan B, because plan C. So when you plant all this arugula and you got it going to the market, but you didn't take into account that the flea beetles was going to eat it all up, you didn't buy enough seeds. So now your crop is devastated because you are not going to use any spray, the killer spray that causes cancer and all these things to yourself and your animals and your friends. So I have learned that the only way to have a so-called agribusiness is to manipulate. You have to manipulate every aspect of it. And so we are dutifully and trying not to recreate that system on any level. So it requires a lot of patience and understanding that food is just not one of those things that should be for profit. It's impossible. It's not realistic, sustainable for real. I've learned that by just doing that here. That didn't come from a book. That just came from doing it. I learned a lot. I learned more about myself. How impatient I have been with myself for most of my life. But how much tenacity that I do have. And I think that's an attribute, and a really good attribute that to have is to be tenacious and to keep going back. I've learned that sometimes it's easier to get folks to come into this space as a volunteer gardener, but instead of gardening, we have conversations. Really cool conversations. I've learned that the space that we've created here can nurture all sorts of actions, from home defense to free music concerts to kickoffs for community campaigns. Basic human rights right here in this space by welcoming every sort of human being or every sort of belief or characteristic that you can imagine in this space. And I've learned that folks are to be valued for just being born in the world, just for their human capacity. Whew. I learned that I gotta take the coffee pot outside on a Saturday morning to get Wayne back out there because he's retired. He gave his 10 years and now he gardens from the window looking outside. But that's my partner. He will come out on a Saturday to get the coffee. I've learned a lot. Patience is the most, and it's a place to grow your soul. And understanding that the soil that we dig in and plant in and walk on is a living thing, and it should be treated as such. To dominate or to have dominion over is just futile, and it should be laid. That thought should be laid to rest. So I've learned, and I'm still learning every day, that there are so many needs in our communities that we could not oversaturate our neighborhoods with visionary organizing labs, gardens, all sort of creative, culturally relevant spaces that I do know, and that I take great pride in being an environmentalist at this point, someone who is really appreciative and understanding the interconnectedness of this planet, Mother Earth, and the human beings that reside here, and the plant life and the water and all those things. It's been a steady understanding, awakening, and then to really realize that we have no room to push back against what's proper and being truthful. We don't have any room. There's no more room for that. So those are just some of the things I've learned as I continue and take others with me. And this is a place that I learn on a daily basis. So along with others, whoever visits. So
Thank you, Myrtle. Matt?
Before I do that, is it okay if I ask a question of Myrtle? Y'all mind?
Indeed. Well, I don't mind.
Myrtle, I wonder if you might tell us, you said you learned what it looks like to grow our souls. You mind telling us what you know what I mean, what it means to what that means to grow our souls?
I'm gonna use one of Matt's favorite stories that he learned from us. And we have this youth enrichment program, and we bring young folks to the garden for like 5 weeks. And we get an array of beautiful young people. And so my daughter and some of the other assistants, staff, they would be staff. There was Ebony, there's Monique, there was Curtis and Paul. But this particular day, one of the young folks was working in the watermelon patch. And he knew it was a watermelon patch because we go through and we identify things and we talk about things. And young people try to be funny, hee ha ha, or they always trying to crack a weird joke or whatever or something, or just be super humorous. Well, this young cat went over to the watermelon patch and yanked the babies off the ground and held them up in the air and said, "Are these weeds?" You can hear screams throughout the garden over the demise of, because once you pull the baby watermelons out, they are very fragile. They're done. And so, that's where that patience, instead of, just really being just distraught with this one kid because that wasn't the first time he did something just like real bogus. What happened was he got a lesson, and he realized he hurt people by hurting those plants. And so we had to put those 2 watermelons to rest. We put them back because he said they'll grow back. And we're like, no, they won't. But we let him put them back in the ground, patted them up, watered them up, and he watched those watermelons just fade away. But his thing for the rest of the garden was to tend the watermelons. And he did that. And we could watch this young man transform from that moment to the end of the season. He became more thoughtful, more quiet, more observant. And even though he outgrew the program, that next season, him and his mom called to let me know that they were starting their own backyard garden. Because he came originally because it was his mom's idea. He just wanted to, make his mom happy, maybe, get a reward at the end of the program. But he went from being a disruptive, disinterested young person into one of our stellar, and I don't mean shiny, bright, I just mean more thoughtful, more caring. We watched that young man grow. And I think part of growing your souls, this organization has touched everybody in my family. And so our conversations mostly revolve around what's happening here, what's happening in the world, what are we doing? So how do you go from just thinking about yourself into thinking about the whole? That's that expansion. That's that growth. That's soul growth. When you worry about what you're doing in front of you, how is it going to affect somebody across the water? That's when you know.
Thank you, Myrtle. And I think the last statement of what you just said might be the beginning of a response to one of the questions we have from in the chat, which we'll get to shortly. Matt, you want to tell us a little bit now about what you learned and how you've grown through the Vision Organizing Lab? as well as what you've seen in others?
Yeah, sure. I'll keep it short. I think that one of the most significant things I've learned is that, let me back up. When I got involved in social movements, the idea was that you have an idea. You go out into the community or the workplace and you propagate that idea. You agitate it. You educate people around the idea. You agitate, and then you try to organize around it. And if that worked, we'd be living in a very different world than we do now. And that's not to say it doesn't work, period. But if we have the courage to reflect on how well that method works, taken from one of Steve and my favorite books, judgments must be made, choices taken. And that's Cedric Robinson's Black Marxism, if you get a chance to look it up. I don't mean to sound cryptic. So I think that one of the things I've learned is that ideas don't move people. But what does is connection. And that ideas become important only in the context of relationships. And that when I have a relationship with you, Steve, or with you, Myrtle, when you have a relationship with me, ideas become a bit more significant in the context of those relationships. I don't pretend to necessarily understand how or why, but I do know that they do. And I imagine there's something around, I do know why, I do know how, because I've seen it play out over the years. When we have relationships with people, any challenge we pose to them can be received with a bit more trust and comfort than that which comes from a stranger. And I do believe, I don't believe that ideas transform people. But what I've learned is that the nexus of relationships and ideas create transformations. When we build with each other and we challenge each other to think differently, to be differently, to live differently, to love differently, those challenges can become generative when there's a container created for them. And so I think that what I can tell you is that one of the things that I've learned is how to create those containers. And I'm learning how to train others to create those containers. It's very difficult work, it's very difficult work, and word to Myrtle, similar to Myrtle, the patience, building things requires massive amounts of patience is something I've learned. I don't think there are too many universal truths. That's one. If you're building something, you better have some patience. And I think that's a universal truth. And I've learned that I can only be effective in creating. So I will be as effective towards the creation of something to the degree that I'm taking care of my spiritual self and mental health. Because if I'm not taking care of myself spiritually, if I'm not paying attention to my mental health, my ego will enter the conversation and annihilate my relationships with everyone. That is just what it does. And so what I've learned is how to create space for other people to contribute, to use their gifts to contribute to something, to creating something bigger than all of us as individuals.
Thank you, Matt. I want to ask a follow-up question to you now. And Myrtle, I have a couple of others I want to ask you in a moment.
Okay.
I'm going to follow up to that last point you said, the last few things you were saying there, Matt. With this, earlier, describing your journey, you made a distinction between mobilizing and organizing. You said at that point in your life, you were good at the former, mobilizing, but not at the latter, organizing, because you needed to do some healing to be able to connect with people. So I want to invite you to say just a bit about how you're making that distinction between mobilizing and organizing, and what's significant about the distinction.
Mm-hmm.
And then following from that, and most importantly, why did your organization, your entity is called the Visionary Organizing Lab.
Mm-hmm.
What is visionary? Why did you put visionary in front of organizing? What does that mean? And how does that help us understand our main focus here, the relationship between changing yourself and changing the world?
It's a profound question. Thank you, Steve. I might need you to remind me of the actual question as I go through. But the first one, the difference between mobilizing and organizing. You know, as I understand it, the massive demonstrations we see, I'll call those are mobilizations. You know, those are, you mobilize people to march on the Capitol, for example. You know, that's a mobilization. Organizing is long, slow, and painful. You know, I mean, it's slow, tedious work. It is hard. I have never not questioned why I continue to do it, because it's hard. And it's hard in part because it's about relationship building. It's about nurturing others. It's about developing others. Mobilizing looks at people the same way Amazon looks at workers. You are a body to fill a space. You know, Amazon says you are a body on this line, you know, to get these packages shipped out. Mobilization is you are just a body, you know, to represent a position. Mobilizing tends to erase our humanity, or it's very easy for mobilizations to erase our humanity, to erase that which is that makes us who we are. Organizing, in contrast, requires that all of us contribute what it is that's specific to us, to transform a situation, to create something new. In this, you know, in Myrtle's case, a garden. You know, in the case of other actions like community created solar energy systems, you know, I think that organizing, good organizing, is necessarily creative, is necessarily imaginative. And I think that, although not always transformative, and I think that the distinction, while we put visionary in front of organizing, is one, a nod to our place in the intellectual and organizational and personal, I guess, or cultural at least, lineage of James and Grace Lee Boggs, a term that, you know, Grace came up with the term, and never explained it all that well in writing. So, you know, people are free to, you know, take it and run with it, and, you know, and do what's there. But part of the reason that we do it is, I think it's in part a reaction or a response to years of reacting. You know, reacting to oppression by demanding an end to police brutality, for example, with no clear vision of what a world without police brutality might look like. I think, for example, my position is that the police need to be abolished. I don't make any bones about that. That is my position. And you can organize to do that. I think organizing around abolishing the police is irresponsible if you don't have a vision of what's going to become of those police who require policing to earn, to make a living. And I think that in the process of providing a vision for what might happen, for how everyone can benefit from the abolition of police, that is visionary organizing. It not only takes a position, it not only has a demand or an idea, but it takes the time to explain how that idea will improve everyone's life, will allow all of us to become more fully human in the process. And so I think that only happens through a vision. Steve, if you tell me, if you can, the difference between saying, you know, Matt, you really ought to not call the police, and there's a murder on my block, how am I supposed to respond? But if you can come with a vision of, instead of calling the police, we can develop a whole team of community-based conflict resolvers, then I might be more willing to entertain the idea of abolishing the police. And so I think that visionary organizing involves the projection of a vision under the premise that human beings have a psychological and emotional need to have some degree of stability. And when you get to talking about, you know, eliminating the police and so on and so forth, that can pose a threat to human beings' need for stability and psychological certainty and stability and so on and so forth. And so I think that I'll just say this, the Visionary Organizing Lab involves the projection of a vision, not just because it's good organizing, but because it makes a contribution to helping people feel safe in moving from one position or place to another. And that considering what allows human beings to grow, transform, and feel safe is part of what it means to be a visionary organizer and a loving human being.
Those three things, to grow, to transform, and to feel safe, are wrapped up in this question I want to ask you, Myrtle, which is about the work of Freedom Growers. And I'm going to name three things, which I think are interrelated, but you take them as it makes sense to you. I want to ask you about how Freedom Growers, as it's grown and the work you do, how has that impacted your relationship with your neighbors in the various ways, one. Two, you told us about 291 Culture House. Can you tell us anything about, well, what it does as sort of this culture hub, library, function, history, you know, inside space? But can you tell us about how it evolved in the course of your evolution of your work? And then three, gentrification. Freedom Growers is on the street called Manistee on the east side of Detroit, not too far from the river. It's in an area of intense, increasing land speculation. So questions of gentrification, and I want to recognize that word is used in various ways, different meanings, but it's used a lot. So I'm inviting you to talk about any of these as they may be related, Myrtle. If the relationship with your neighbors, how 291 Culture House grew out of your work, and what about gentrification or debates about it has been part of what you've been involved in.
All right. So the impact of our work on this neighborhood, we've been called many things. We've been called ambassadors. We've ushered in, we created this thing that folks thought was just like a wonderful attribute to the neighborhood. We've created, when we started, there were not very many gardens over here, but now you can go from one end, which is, this block is a mile long, there you will find many gardens now. You will find a solar outdoor screen. You will find a flower for-profit business. You will find a solar garden where folks will be able to power their houses. Some of it, you know, there's a lot more to it than just throwing some solar panels up. But anyway, and immediately across from here, there's now a wonderful pavilion and nature space that leads to the canal where folks go fishing. There's a farm stand. I mean, thousands of dollars worth of time and energy went into these projects at a grassroots level. We're still asking our city to help us put sidewalks down where the houses were torn down a few years ago which was ushering in the gentrification. So I rolled down the street, this whole east side, anywhere near the water. I'm 15 minutes from downtown Detroit, 2 minutes by car from the water. Well, I can walk back here, there's a canal here, but I was riding down the street headed towards Midtown area, the cultural, I'll call the cultural district, where the Wayne State, the library, the art museums and stuff, where they are. And I rode down Kercheval Avenue, and I was blown away because it's totally different. I'm gonna tell you how blown away I was. I'm looking around, like, where am I? And I stopped at a red light, and the light didn't turn green, and I proceeded to go through because I was that torn up internally. It looks good. But I said, my people not gonna be able to stay here. And I felt sad. I felt concerned. I was torn up. I had to pull the car over and regroup. That gentrification. I'm talking, there are apartment buildings where there have never been. They're wiping stuff out. I get people every day asking me. So we'll go from gentrification, which is transforming the city from the folks who were able to stay here through all of the crises, the many crises, who are now being priced out, penalized out, and fighting to maintain water bills and taxes and services. So the 291 Culture Hub was a house on this block near the water, the Detroit River. I bought it, me and Wayne, back in 2010 for $2,000. Right now, the asking price, we put the house back together because we wanted it for a personal house, but that didn't happen. We wanted all these alternative energies. We want geothermal. We wanted solar roofing. But when we were doing it, it was like outrageous to even talk like that. And that was what, 10 years ago. And so now we put the house back together with the team of local folks doing the work, learning how to do the work as they went. It looks great. It's fully functional. It passed inspection. Asking price for that now, $300,000. We paid $2 million. I am deeply troubled and concerned of why those prices are so desirable. Gentrification is real because when folks come in, they change. You want the soul of the city, but you don't want the people. And so the people are forced to the lower suburbs, in which folks now call those the projects. They're across 8 Mile, which would be considered a suburb, but it's nothing suburban about it, except they're more white folks in those areas, more affluent folks on those really far out areas. And so with the portrayal of Detroit as a city where you can come and create your own and do what you want and just, hey, it's a lot different. My children who are in their 30s said Detroit doesn't feel like the city that they grew up loving, which is very painful to hear. it's the city government and structure has always been troublesome for me in Detroit all my life. I don't care who was at the helm. City leadership is city leadership. There's some bad decisions being made, and there are still bad decisions being made. The politics, the way things look now. I'll give you an example. So we have alleys in Detroit. Behind your house is a space. There's a backyard, and then there's an alley. A lot of places, some don't have alleys, but a lot of us do have alleys on the east side. So years ago, the city decided to move the garbage cans to the front of the house, to keep down rats, I get it. But they would no longer go through the alleys and take care of anything. So the alleys became this hotbed of vines and trees that grew up. The population went down, so it really got bad. Transformers were blowing. So the ideas of how to run a city in a long term were never there. So now you can buy half of your alley. So people said buying half the alley, and they're blocking off little sections. I've never seen anything like it. I don't see the cohesion. I see where individualism is running rampant. Beer gardens or churches that were once churches are now beer gardens in our neighborhoods. I don't know. It's disheartening for me because progress should not come at the cost of people's ability to be housed and fed and safe. Schools are closing. Most of the decent schools now are located close to downtown or these hubs where the gentrification is really strong. Like the Waldorf school that costs thousands of dollars to go is along that strip that blew my mind on Kercheval. We're going to continue what we do here as we try to keep ourselves strong. We have a very strong connection to our neighbors behind us, around us. Rarely anything happens in our neighborhood without folks letting us know, because I don't, just try to spearhead everything. I'm really trying to grow good food, trying to keep the culture hub a space for what was missing in the schools, what's missing in our neighborhoods. We try to have activities at the 291 Culture Hub. We try to have those activities here. And so we have been a good impact in this area, in this city. We've taken one abandoned house and put it back on and turned it into something good. And we are being impacted all around us every day by gentrification, Stephen. And I appreciate you letting me get that piece out, because I never would have figured I would have been viscerally affected by driving down the street and just seeing it totally transformed before my very eyes. I didn't think it would bother me like that. I endangered my own life because I was so, where am I? Yeah.
Well, I think it's one of the reasons why it's wonderful for you to share that, is because it helps to bring a depth to this conversation about connection to place, which we haven't explicitly discussed yet, but certainly has been there.
I'm not a fan of ruin. I'm not a fan of dilapidation. But on the other hand, it shouldn't be for real, a $50,000 house, 90,000 tops. Should not be an asking price $300,000. I mean, that's not bad, but it's just, what does it do to the?
Well, it's like you said, you have that feeling of my people are not going to stay here. So it's the changes and how the changes are transforming and displacing and so forth. So, and there's quite a bit more that could be said there. But let's get to, we have a couple of questions. So let's share those. And this one is to you, Myrtle. It says, so much wisdom here. This is from earlier, so it's not referring to the last thing you said. The questioner says, so much wisdom here. I'm curious about Ms. Thompson Curtis's comment that food is one of those things that should not be done for profit. What transformations in yourself as an individual and in the food/governance system are required to make it possible to generate food without a profit motive?
Oh my goodness, that is so much work. But food, to decentralize food is a start. Every place is capable of growing something. And for those places, fish or meat is a food source. So to not ship food from one end of the earth to the other end of the earth, when it will take everybody to participate. It will take the truth and honesty about the food system first, and injustices in it, and the money of who gets paid for what. The COVID crisis should have revealed a lot of what's wrong with our food system. It will take everybody to participate on consuming less, to consuming seasonal, to understanding what we grow, why we grow it, how it grows. It will take, you would have to take the fossil fuels out of it. It's a very big process. If everybody had a backyard garden, it would make a dent. Everybody does not have room for a backyard garden. But for those of us who can grow, we can grow a little bit more. With farming and garden, that's a lot of work. Everybody doesn't want to do it. Everybody could do it. Everybody doesn't want to do it. I mean, governmental, I'm not going to, and I don't want to be glib or flip, but to imagine government stepping out of it. I used to sit on the porch when I was a kid and play I Wish. That was one of my favorite. I wish. I'm not getting ready to play that now. But I will say, it would take all of us to really understand what supermarkets mean, how we eat, and who's getting rich off of it. I mean, understand the manipulation. Everything is manipulated. I do go to the grocery store. I do. I buy stuff from far away. I like imported cheeses and fine olive oils, but not everyday consumption. You know, to educate ourselves, we have a wealth of information at our fingertips of how do we unpack this. I don't have all the answers, love. I don't. I do understand decentralizing and taking subsidies out, but then subsidies, it's a lot of work.
Well, you gave some broad answers, decentralizing, broader education and public and policy changes, but you gave us very specific local, small scale, and even individual actions and thoughts as part of your answer there. So yes, man, go ahead, man.
I just want to tell a story about the last time I was at Myrtle's house. Because what I heard Myrtle just say is enormous. I've also seen Myrtle begin that work in small ways that all of us can do today. And so I just want to center some of what I've seen Myrtle do over the years. I was at Myrtle's house January 2020, maybe. And a neighbor came and knocked on the door. And Myrtle answered the door, and the woman gave Myrtle a pizza and some eggs. And Myrtle went to the refrigerator, put them both in there. And the neighbor who came and brought Myrtle the pizza and eggs went out in the yard and grabbed some tomatoes. She grabbed some peppers. She got the produce she needed. And so I offer that because I think that I love this question about what transformations in yourself and the food governance system will require to make it possible to generate food without a profit motive. That's an enormous question. And one of the things that I find useful is to start small with those questions, and also challenge that what's not there is what economic transformations are necessary. First, we need a new economy if food is not going to be profit. Like, we need a new economic system. And in watching Myrtle over the years, one of the things I've learned is that the seeds of a new economy might be found in that kind of exchange that Myrtle practices with our neighbors. Not everybody can grow food, but those who can are an opportunity to make the rest of us less reliant on the capitalist industrial food system through various means of exchange.
Thank you, Matt. It seems to me that what Myrtle shared earlier about her own evolution and Freedom Grow's work set the context for that exchange that you witnessed to happen. And so that is that's exhibiting, living, and showing what it means to change yourself, to change the world, to what it means to build community, what it means to do this type of work, and things it can lead to. Okay, so let me go to the next question to recognize the people who have been offering their thoughts and questions. This one is not identified to either of us, but I'll throw it to you first, at least, Matt. The questioner says, this has been touched on a bit in your discussion of coalitions and organizing, but what do you see as the limitations of a materialistic approach to society and therefore to social change? And how can a moral and spiritual approach help us to overcome some of these limitations?
That's a beautiful question.
Yeah.
And I don't have a beautiful answer. What I can say is that I love this idea that the limits of a materialist or materialistic approach. I think right now we are living through a period when people are refusing to work. There are things that are more important to people than money. That, whole fast food restaurants are shutting down because the workers are saying, you know what? My dignity is more important than this check. And that leads me to believe that if we can learn to connect with people's spirits, we have yet to see what human beings are capable of. We have figured out how to fly. We done figured out how to create this conversation. We done invented electricity, but we ain't learned. Speaking of, said my internet connection is unstable, so we ain't figured it out that well. But we figured all that out, but we ain't figured out how to live with each other. We've been driven by materialism to the point we figured out everything but how to survive. We conduct ourselves in a way where extinction becomes more and more likely every day. And I think that the only way we're to tackle that problem of human survival and existence and human community, we got to figure out how to reach each other's spirits. And I think that is, there's something about love. There's something about love that we need to get better at, because I have seen love transform human beings I once believed were incapable of being transformed. And so I don't know about how I know how a spiritual and moral approach might help us overcome some of that. But I don't think there's a universal way to practice it other than expending ourselves for the growth of other people and practicing love.
And perhaps there need not be one universal way, but there could be multiple. We have another question here. What approaches have you taken in raising the capacity and agency of those you're working with? How do you accompany people in their efforts to transform?
I would say, along with that word, patience and love, being loving, is learning when stepping back is the way to allow someone to step up or step forward. How we address, I know a lot of issues arise through conflict? How do we resolve conflicts? Allows folks to grow and expand, especially inside of organizations. Our membership or our organization has transformed and changed through who is at the lead or who holds what responsibility. As I get older, and like I mentioned, my partner Wayne, to be able to step back and not hold on to the reins and allow the transformation or the organization to grow in the way that it's supposed to, has to happen. As movements and struggles evolve, organizations evolve, or they should, because time is not stagnant. And what worked 10 years ago may look very different today. And so to be able to not be one of those elders the young folks don't care for because you want to hold the reins so tight. It is a beautiful thing to nurture leadership or the capacity of another individual, or, all those differences that make us who we are have helped me to understand the world that I live in. It doesn't look just like me. It's Black, it's white, it's Asian, it's Hispanic, it's queer. I mean, it's sometimes, I don't know, but it's okay. And that's where we're going. It doesn't look like calling the police. It looks like the Detroit safety team. What is the Detroit safety team? It's that thing we created or they've created and brought to us to keep us safe on our small community events so we don't have to call in the Detroit police. When folks see our safety team, they understand. Oh, we cool, we straight, we can park here, they're gonna help us, they're gonna explain things. You know what they keep in their bag? Peppermint oil, lavender, what else? A bell, those things for sensory. But I'm just saying, allowing others to step up and not hold the reins so tight. And I'm speaking as an elder. Now, there's many ways, but understanding that the world does not all look like me. I love myself, but I have to make room. For others.
That beautiful answer. You said so much, and the only thing I'll add, about, I don't know, maybe a decade ago, I was sitting in a room in New York, and I was with Grace Lee Boggs and Nelson Johnson, who is a radical pastor in Greensboro, North Carolina, and founder, along with his wife Joyce, of the Beloved Community Center in Greensboro. And we were having a conversation, and Angela Davis came up. And Angela Davis had said something that the three of us disagreed with. And the two of them said, Matt, you should talk to Angela about that. You should challenge her on that and talk to her about that. And I didn't do it. You know what I mean? I didn't just reach out and say, Angela, I think you're wrong on X, Y, and Z. Because I thought myself too small. I said, who is Angela to listen to this young white dude who she don't know from a can of paint? And I think that's a very practical, technical question that has some legitimacy. But what I learned in reflection is that one of the ways I've been blessed with incredible old heads, and one of the ways that they've developed my capacity is to believe in me greater than I believed in myself, to challenge me to do things that were undoable in my mind. And in those challenges, I gradually learned that I could trust in my own ability the way that the people around me believed in it. You know, if all these people believe in me, who am I not to believe in what they're saying about me? Who am I not to believe in myself? And so one of the things that I've kind of developed as a way to develop other people's capacity is to demonstrate, to show people, to tell people that I believe in them, to challenge them to do things that they think they can't do, and to be there and to support them, and not necessarily coach them through doing it, because I might not have the skills to do that, but I can coach them through developing a belief in themselves to follow it through. And so I think that in addition to all the beautiful things that Myrtle has said, you know, I think that one of the greatest things that people have ever done to me, and so I've extended to others, is to challenge them to do more than they think they can do, to challenge them to do outrageous things, or what seem to be outrageous things, out of a trust that the human spirit grows into what's in front of us.
Thank you both. I want to offer two words which I think help to capture a lot of what you said and some of what you haven't said, but what I know of the work that you both do. One is liberated zones, a phrase which Wayne Curtis, Myrtle's partner, who she's referenced a few times, has used. Another is networks. And in some ways, it's the same thing, but both of you have created spaces for people to live and grow, work together, and so forth. We have, I think, one more question. Curious about the way that these efforts, especially the numerous and beautiful examples in the vicinity of freedom growers, are seen as being connected and as generating knowledge. In what ways do the experiences of growing food or rebuilding a house generate knowledge that gets remembered and shared and passed on to others? And Matt is directly involved with in learning about and from freedom. So I will invite Matt, if you have some thoughts to go along with what Myrtle might share.
I was thinking, you know, with Matt's writing, you know, that's one way that the knowledge gets passed on. And I hope the house and the work continues as a legacy to what was started as a foundation. I hope that the garden remains, and so many people come through, and we share so many, we have so many beautiful conversations here. We are currently working on documenting our journey, but through the messages and the experiences that happen here, they get carried, you know, as people come and people go, along with written documentation or just a physical attribute, or how that knowledge gets shared or carried, or I'm really thinking of what Matt is doing right now and what so many others have done, along with being here at this space and having conversation with us and then recording those conversations. I don't know, maybe I'm inviting that person who asked that question to come and experience what's happening in Detroit at our space, or, you know, one of the other spaces that we've talked about on this at this conference. So
there you go.
Mm-hmm.
Matt, you want to say just a quick word, half a minute?
Yeah, sure. Visionary Organizing Lab is creating a documentary on freedom growers, a short 10 to 15 minute documentary, as well as sharing the story of freedom growers in writing, with the intent to spark both the imagination that we can all do something like freedom where we live, and that it has implications for the earlier question about how we might decentralize food and create a new economy.
Yeah, so the visit the space.
There it is. So as we conclude our time together, I want to emphasize the last thing you just heard there, which is that Freedom Growers and Visionary Organizing Lab have been and continuing to work together, doing that work to pass on and to document, share what's happening in Freedom Grower and help develop the movement. So what we've done today is just opening up ways to think about a theme of changing ourselves to change the world. We'll close with 3 more contributions to the chat. Not questions. So one says, no question, just many thanks. Another says, please convey my deep appreciation of the experiences and thoughts the speakers are sharing. Very inspiring and thought-provoking. And then finally, wow, this session is out of this world, but belongs on this earth. Let's close with that. Everyone be well.
Beautiful.
Thanks, y'all.
Peace.